The barbecue smoke drifted across our perfectly manicured backyard, carrying with it the sound of forced laughter and clinking wine glasses. I stood at the grill, flipping burgers for 30-odd neighbors who probably couldn't pick me out of a lineup despite living on the same street for 5 years. That's the thing about Connecticut suburbs. Everyone knows your business, but nobody really knows you. "Evan, honey, come meet the Hendersons." Lila's voice cut through the evening air like a knife through butter. Sweet on the surface, sharp underneath. I'd been married to that voice for 8 years, long enough to recognize when she was performing for an audience. I wiped my hands on my apron, the one that said "Grill Master," that she'd bought me last Christmas, probably as a joke, and walked over to where she stood with a couple I'd never seen before. The man wore a polo shirt that cost more than most people's car payments, and his wife clutched a designer purse like it contained the crown jewels. "This is Evan," Lila said, her smile bright enough to power the neighborhood. "He's someone I know." The words hit me like a slap. Someone she knows, not her husband, not the man she'd promised to love and honor, just someone she knows, like I was the mailman or the guy who delivered groceries. The Henderson woman extended her hand, confusion flickering across her Botoxed features. "Nice to meet you, Evan. How do you two know each other?" I could have let it slide. Should have, probably. But something in Lila's casual dismissal of our entire relationship lit a fuse that had been waiting to ignite for months, maybe years. "I'm the husband," I said, my voice carrying just far enough to reach the nearby conversations. "The one who's apparently selling the house." The backyard didn't exactly go quiet. That only happens in movies. But I watched the ripple effect of my words spread through the crowd like spilled wine on white carpet. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Heads turned. Someone's wine glass stopped halfway to their lips. Lila's smile never wavered, but her eyes promised retribution later. "Evan's got such a sense of humor," she laughed, the sound brittle as autumn leaves. "He's an architect." Well, he was. Now he flips houses. "Actually," a voice boomed from behind us, "I might be interested in making an offer." Before we deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Dennis Harper stepped into our little circle like he owned it, which, knowing Dennis, he probably thought he did. As the HOA president and the neighborhood's unofficial social coordinator, Dennis had a way of inserting himself into every conversation, every decision, every aspect of life on Maple Street. He was one of those men who'd been handsome once and refused to accept that once had passed. His hair was still thick, but obviously colored, his smile too white to be natural, and his handshake lasted exactly 3 seconds longer than comfortable. He'd moved in next door 2 years ago after his divorce, bringing with him a sense of entitlement that seemed to expand daily. "Dennis," I said, matching his grip pound for pound. "Didn't realize you were in the market." "Always looking for the right opportunity," he replied, his eyes not on me but on Lila. "Beautiful property, great bones. Sometimes you have to move fast when you see something you want." The Henderson couple exchanged glances, sensing undercurrents they couldn't quite identify. Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat. "Well, this is exciting. A real estate transaction right here at the party." "Oh, we're not actually selling," I said, watching Dennis's face carefully. Lila was just making conversation. But Dennis wasn't backing down. "What would you say to $450? Cash. Close in 30 days. The number hung in the air like smoke. Our house was worth maybe $380 on a good day, and Dennis knew it. This wasn't about real estate. This was about something else entirely. "That's generous," I said slowly. "Almost too generous. Makes a man wonder what the rush is." Lila's hand found my arm, her nails digging in just enough to send a message. "Dennis is just being neighborly, aren't you, Dennis?" "Always happy to help out friends," Dennis replied, but his smile had an edge now. Think about it, Evan. Sometimes change is exactly what people need. The Henderson woman was practically vibrating with excitement at being witness to whatever drama was unfolding. Her husband looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, which made him the smartest person in our little group. I'll definitely think about it, I said. In fact, I'm thinking about it right now. And you know what I'm thinking? Dennis raised an eyebrow. Lila's nails dug deeper. I'm thinking that's a hell of an offer for a house that wasn't officially on the market until about 30 seconds ago. Makes me wonder if you've been inside recently. To assess the value. The silence that followed was the kind that makes people uncomfortable. Dennis's smile faltered for just a moment, long enough for me to see something flicker behind his eyes. Guilt, anger, fear. Just good at reading the market, he said finally. Been in real estate for 15 years. Funny, I replied. Lila's been in real estate for 10 years, and she never mentioned you two knowing each other professionally. Lila's laugh was too loud, too bright. Oh, we've run into each other at a few industry events, haven't we, Dennis? Small world in Connecticut real estate. Very small, Dennis agreed, but he was looking at me now, measuring. Well, I should let you get back to your guests. Think about my offer, Evan. Good things come to those who don't wait too long. He walked away, stopping to chat with the Kowalskis near the pool, but I could feel his attention still focused on our little group like a spotlight. The Henderson woman was practically bouncing. How exciting! Are you really going to sell? We'll see, I said, watching Dennis work the crowd. He had that politician's gift of making everyone feel like they were the most important person in the room. Right now, he was making Mrs. Kowalski laugh at something that probably wasn't that funny. Where would you go? Mrs. Henderson pressed. Somewhere warmer? We've been thinking about Florida ourselves. Haven't really thought that far ahead, I admitted. This is all pretty sudden. Lila squeezed my arm again, this time more gently. Evan likes to think things through, she said. He's very methodical. There was something in her tone, affection mixed with exasperation, that reminded me of why I'd married her in the first place. Lila could be charming when she wanted to be, and for a moment, I almost forgot about the "someone I know" comment. Well, if you do decide to sell, you'll have to let us know how it goes, Mr. Henderson said, finally joining the conversation. We might be looking to downsize ourselves in a few years. I'll keep you posted, I promised, though something told me this whole situation was going to get a lot more complicated before it got simpler. The party continued around us, but I found myself watching Dennis more than socializing. He moved through the crowd like he belonged there, like these were his guests at his party in his neighborhood. When he laughed, other people laughed. When he spoke, people listened. He had that kind of magnetic personality that draws people in, the kind that makes you forget to ask important questions, like why he was so interested in buying my house, and why he seemed to know my wife better than she'd let on. As the evening wound down and neighbors began making their excuses, I helped Lila clean up while she chattered about who wore what and who said what to whom. Normal post-party gossip that usually went in one ear and out the other. The Hendersons seem nice, she said, stacking plates with the efficiency of someone who'd hosted a lot of dinner parties. He's in finance, apparently. She volunteers at the animal shelter. I replied, focused on scraping the grill. What about Dennis's offer? Her hands stilled for just a moment. What about it? $450 is a lot of money, more than we'd get on the open market. It's also our home, Evan. We can't just sell to the first person who makes an offer. Even if it's a good offer? Even if it's from someone you know professionally? She resumed stacking plates, but her movements were more deliberate now. Dennis is just being friendly. You know how he is. Actually, I don't know how he is. That's the problem. Lila sighed, the sound carrying more weight than simple exasperation. What's that supposed to mean? It means he's been our neighbor for 2 years, and tonight was the first time I've had a real conversation with him. But somehow, he knows enough about our house to make a cash offer on the spot. He's observant, and he's in real estate. So are you. When's the last time you made a cash offer on a neighbor's house at a barbecue? She turned to face me, and for a moment, I saw something in her expression I couldn't quite identify. Frustration? Guilt? You're being paranoid, Evan. Dennis is just being neighborly. Neighborly is borrowing a cup of sugar. This is something else. Like what? I could have pushed it then. Could have asked the questions that were forming in the back of my mind. But something held me back. Maybe the hope that I was wrong. Maybe the fear that I was right. I don't know, I said finally. But I'm going to find out. The next morning brought one of those perfect Connecticut autumn days that make you forget why anyone lives anywhere else. The leaves were just starting to turn, painting the neighborhood in shades of gold and crimson. I sat on our front porch with my coffee, watching Dennis load golf clubs into his Range Rover. He saw me watching and raised a hand in greeting. "Morning, Evan. Beautiful day." "Gorgeous," I called back. "Early tea time?" "You know it. Want to join us sometime? I'm always looking for a fourth." "I'll think about it," I replied, though we both knew I wouldn't. I'd played golf exactly once in my life and spent more time in the sand traps than on the fairways. Dennis climbed into his car and backed out of his driveway, pausing to wave again before driving off. As soon as he was out of sight, I found myself studying his house with new eyes. It was bigger than ours, a colonial revival with all the bells and whistles, professional landscaping, a 3-car garage, and windows that probably cost more than most people's cars. Dennis clearly had money, which made his interest in our more modest home even more puzzling. Spying on the neighbors? I turned to find Lila standing in the doorway, dressed for work in one of those sharp business suits that made her look like she could sell ice to an Eskimo. "Just enjoying the morning," I said. "You're up early." "Open house in Westport at 10. Big colonial, asking $850. She stepped onto the porch, her heels clicking against the wood. "I might not be home until late." "New listing?" "Potential. The owners are still deciding whether to sell." She leaned down to kiss my cheek, her perfume familiar and comforting. "Try not to obsess about Dennis while I'm gone, okay?" "I'm not obsessing." "You're sitting on the porch at 7:30 in the morning, staring at his house." "I'm drinking coffee and enjoying the view." She smiled, and for a moment everything felt normal again. "Just remember, not everyone has ulterior motives, Evan. Sometimes people are just being friendly." After she left, I found myself thinking about that word. Friendly. In my experience, people were friendly when they wanted something. The question was what Dennis wanted, and why he thought buying our house would help him get it. I spent the morning working on a design for a client in Stamford, a kitchen renovation that was more about ego than functionality. The homeowner wanted granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, and enough cabinet space to stock a restaurant. It was the kind of project that paid well but left me feeling empty, like I was just rearranging deck chairs while the ship went down. Around noon, I took a break and walked to the mailbox. Mrs. Kowalski was working in her garden, and she waved me over with the enthusiasm of someone who spent too much time alone. "Evan, how are you, dear? Last night was lovely." "Glad you enjoyed it," I said. "Lila always goes overboard with the party planning." "She's such a treasure. You're lucky to have her." Mrs. Kowalski pulled a weed with more force than necessary. "That Dennis Harper is quite the charmer, isn't he?" "He certainly makes an impression." "Oh, he does indeed. Did you know he's been asking questions about you and Lila?" My attention sharpened. "What kind of questions?" "Oh, you know, how long you've been married, what you do for work, whether you're happy in the neighborhood." She straightened up, brushing dirt from her gardening gloves. "I told him it wasn't any of his business, but he just laughed and said he was trying to be a good neighbor." "When was this?" Last week? Maybe the week before. He caught me coming back from the grocery store and helped me carry my bags. Very gallant. She paused, studying my face. I hope I didn't speak out of turn. Not at all, Mrs. Kowalski. Thanks for letting me know. I walked back to the house with my mind racing. Dennis had been asking questions about us for weeks. That put his sudden interest in buying our house in a whole different light. Back inside, I found myself staring at Lila's home office. She'd converted the spare bedroom into a workspace, complete with a desk, filing cabinets, and a computer setup that was more sophisticated than what most businesses used. She claimed she needed it for her real estate work, but I'd always wondered if it was overkill for someone who spent most of her time showing houses. The computer was password protected, of course. I tried a few obvious combinations, her birthday, our anniversary, her maiden name, but had no luck. Then I remembered something she'd said once about using the same password for everything because she could never remember multiple combinations. I tried Maple 2019, our address and the year we moved in. The screen unlocked. I felt like I was crossing a line, but Mrs. Kowalski's revelation had shifted something in my thinking. If Dennis was asking questions about us, maybe Lila knew more about his interest than she was letting on. Her email was organized with the precision of someone who took their work seriously. Folders for clients, prospects, industry contacts, and personal correspondence. I started with the personal folder, telling myself I was just looking for any mention of Dennis. I found it in her sent messages from 3 weeks ago. D. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. E will be at the Hendricks site all day. Same place as last time? L. My hands started shaking as I scrolled through more messages. They were careful, coded, but the pattern was clear. Meetings during the day when I was working. References to our project and making it work. And then, from 2 days ago, D. He's getting suspicious. Maybe we should slow down until after the party. L. Don't worry about E. He doesn't suspect anything. Trust me. D. I sat back in the chair, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. My wife was having an affair with Dennis Harper. The man who'd offered to buy our house at last night's party was sleeping with my wife. Suddenly, everything made sense. Dennis's interest in our house wasn't about real estate. It was about getting me out of the picture. And Lila's casual dismissal of me as someone she knows wasn't just thoughtless, it was cruel. I printed out the email exchanges and tucked them into my desk drawer. Then, I closed Lila's computer and tried to figure out what to do next. The rational part of my brain said I should confront them directly, demand an explanation, file for divorce, and move on with my life. But another part of me, a part I didn't know existed until that moment, wanted something else entirely. I wanted revenge. The rest of the day passed in a haze of disbelief and growing anger. I tried to work on the Stamford project, but the numbers kept swimming on the page. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those emails. The casual way they'd dismissed me. The planning behind my back. By evening, I'd made a decision. If Lila and Dennis thought they could manipulate me, they were about to learn otherwise. Lila came home around 8, looking tired but satisfied. The Westport showing went well, she announced, kicking off her heels in the entryway. 3 serious inquiries already. That's great, I said, watching her face for any sign of guilt. There wasn't any. She moved around the kitchen with the same confidence she always had, heating up leftover Chinese food and chattering about her day. The owners are definitely ready to sell, she continued. Divorce situation. She wants out fast, he's dragging his feet. You know how it goes. I'm learning, I replied. She looked at me sharply. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. Just that divorce brings out the worst in people. Lila studied my face for a moment, then shrugged. It can, but sometimes it's for the best. Sometimes people grow apart, want different things. Like what? I don't know. Different lifestyles, different priorities. She took a bite of lo mein, chewing thoughtfully. Sometimes one person outgrows the other. The The casual cruelty of the comment took my breath away. She wasn't just having an affair, she was already planning her exit strategy. Interesting perspective, I managed. Speaking of growing apart, I ran into Mrs. Kowalski today. Oh, how is she? Fine. She mentioned that Dennis has been asking questions about us. Lila's chopsticks paused halfway to her mouth. What kind of questions? Personal ones. About our marriage, our work, whether we're happy here. That's odd. But her tone was too casual, too practiced. Maybe he's just trying to be friendly. That's what I thought, until I started wondering why a friendly neighbor would want to buy our house so badly. No, hear me out, it's a legitimate question. Dennis has a beautiful house. Bigger than ours, better location, all the upgrades. So why does he want to downgrade? Lila set down her chopsticks and faced me directly. I don't know, and frankly I don't care. If you don't want to sell to Dennis, we won't sell to Dennis. End of discussion. But you think we should sell? I think we should consider all our options. Options for what? I thought we were happy here. We are. I am. She stood up abruptly. I'm going to take a shower. This conversation is getting weird. After she went upstairs, I sat in the kitchen thinking about the word options. In real estate, options were alternatives. In relationships, they were something else entirely. I waited until I heard the shower running, then went back to Lila's computer. This time, I dug deeper into her files, looking for anything that might explain the timeline of her relationship with Dennis. I found it in her calendar. Lunch meetings with DH going back 6 months. Always on days when I was scheduled to be at job sites. Always at restaurants in towns where we didn't know anyone. But it was her photo folder that really got to me. Mixed in with client photos and house listings were pictures I'd never seen. Dennis at a restaurant, smiling at the camera. Dennis on a golf course. Dennis in what looked like a hotel room, shirtless. My wife had been documenting their relationship like it was something to be proud of. I copied everything to a flash drive and deleted the browsing history. By the time Lila came back downstairs, I was watching television like nothing had happened. Feel better? I asked. Much. She curled up next to me on the couch, her hair still damp from the shower. Sorry if I was snippy earlier. Long day. No problem. I put my arm around her, breathing in the scent of her shampoo. We all have bad days. For a moment it felt like old times, comfortable, normal. Then I remembered the photos on her computer, and the feeling curdled in my stomach. Lila? If you were unhappy, you'd tell me, right? She was quiet for so long, I thought she might not answer. When she did, her voice was soft, almost sad. Of course I would, Evan. We're married. We're supposed to tell each other everything. The lie hung between us like a curtain. I wanted to pull it aside, to confront her with what I knew. But something held me back. Maybe I needed time to process it myself. Maybe I wanted to see how far she'd take the deception. Or maybe I was already planning something that required patience. The next morning, Lila left early for another showing. I waited until her car disappeared around the corner, then walked over to Dennis's house. His Range Rover was in the driveway, which meant he was home. I rang the doorbell and waited, rehearsing what I was going to say. Dennis answered the door in workout clothes, a towel draped around his neck. Evan, what a nice surprise. Come in. Come in. His house was even more impressive on the inside. Hardwood floors, cathedral ceilings, and furniture that looked like it came from a magazine. Everything was perfectly arranged, perfectly clean. It was the kind of place that screamed success and money. Coffee? He offered, leading me toward a kitchen that belonged in a restaurant. Sure. He busied himself with an espresso machine that probably cost more than my car. So what brings you by? Ready to talk about my offer? Actually, yes. I've been thinking about what you said. Dennis's face lit up with interest. And I'm curious about your timeline. You mentioned closing in 30 days. That's pretty aggressive. I'm motivated. He handed me a cup of coffee that smelled like heaven. Sometimes when you see something you want, you have to move fast. Right. But here's what I don't understand. Why our house? You've got a beautiful place here. More space, better finishes. What's the appeal of downgrading? Dennis leaned against his granite countertop, studying me over his coffee cup. Who says it would be a downgrade? Basic math. Your place is worth at least $600. Ours is worth maybe $380 on a good day. Value isn't always about square footage, Evan. Sometimes it's about potential. Potential for what? Improvement, change, new beginnings. He smiled, but there was something calculating in his eyes. Your house has good bones, right size, right location. Sometimes that's more important than fancy finishes. Interesting perspective. I took a sip of coffee, letting the silence stretch. Lila mentioned you two know each other professionally. Connecticut real estate is a small world. So she said, how long have you been working together? We don't work together exactly, more like we run in the same circles. But you've done deals together? Dennis set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. What's with all the questions, Evan? Having second thoughts about selling? Just trying to understand the situation. My wife knows you professionally, you want to buy our house, and you're willing to pay above market value. It's a lot of coincidences. Sometimes coincidences are just coincidences, and sometimes they're not. We stared at each other across his perfect kitchen, and I could see him reassessing me. Up until now, he'd probably thought of me as an obstacle to be managed. Now he was starting to wonder if I might be a threat. Look, Evan, he said finally. If you're not interested in selling, that's fine. I thought I was doing you a favor, but maybe I was wrong. What kind of favor? Giving you an easy out, a chance to start fresh somewhere else. Why would I need to start fresh? Dennis shrugged. People change. Relationships change. Sometimes it's better to recognize that and move on before things get messy. The casual arrogance of the comment took my breath away. He was telling me, to my face, that my marriage was over, and he was offering to help clean up the mess. You're right, I said, setting down my coffee cup. Things can get messy, especially when people think they're smarter than they actually are. Meaning? Meaning I'll definitely consider your offer, but I think I'll shop it around first, see what the market has to say. Dennis's smile didn't waver, but something shifted behind his eyes. Of course, that's smart business. I thought so. I headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and Dennis, thanks for the advice about relationships. I'll keep it in mind. I walked home feeling like I'd just declared war, which, in a way, I had. The question now was how to fight it. I spent the rest of the morning researching Dennis Harper, social media, business records, property transactions, anything I could find. What I discovered was interesting. Dennis had been married before, to a woman named Patricia. They'd divorced 2 years ago, right around the time he moved to our neighborhood. According to the court records I found online, it had been messy. Allegations of infidelity, hidden assets, and emotional manipulation. Patricia had gotten the house in Greenwich, but Dennis had kept most of the liquid assets. She'd also gotten a restraining order that had since expired. More interesting was Dennis's business history. He'd been involved in several real estate deals that had gone sideways. Nothing criminal, but a pattern of partnerships that ended badly and investors who felt cheated. Dennis Harper was a predator, and my wife was his latest target. But as I dug deeper, I started to wonder if Lila was really a victim or if she was something else entirely. The emails I'd found suggested a level of planning and calculation that didn't fit with someone being manipulated. Maybe they deserved each other. That thought should have made me feel better, but it didn't. It just made me angrier. By the time Lila came home that evening, I'd made another decision. If she wanted to play games, I was going to play them better. "How was your day?" she asked, kissing my cheek like she had every right to. Productive. I had coffee with Dennis this morning. She froze for just a moment. So briefly I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching for it. Oh? What did you two talk about? His offer on the house. I wanted to understand his timeline. And I think we should consider it seriously. $450 is a lot of money. Lila stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Really? Yesterday you were suspicious of his motives. Yesterday I didn't understand the opportunity. But Dennis made some good points about starting fresh. What kind of points? That sometimes people outgrow their circumstances. That change can be good. I smiled at her, using her own words from the night before. He's right, don't you think? Yes, I suppose so. So let's do it. Let's take his offer and see what happens. Lila looked genuinely confused, which was exactly what I was going for. Are you sure? This seems like a big decision to make so quickly. Sometimes, when you see an opportunity, you have to move fast, I replied, borrowing Dennis's words. Isn't that what you always tell your clients? Yes, but nothing. Call Dennis tomorrow and tell him we accept his offer. Cash, 30-day close, just like he wanted. I walked upstairs, leaving Lila standing in the kitchen looking like she'd just been hit by a truck. Phase 1 of my plan was complete. Now, things were going to get interesting. That night, I lay awake listening to Lila toss and turn beside me. She was trying to figure out my angle, wondering why I'd suddenly agreed to sell the house to Dennis. What she didn't know was that I had no intention of actually going through with the sale, but I wanted her to think I did. The next morning, Lila was up early, pacing the kitchen with her phone pressed to her ear. I caught fragments of her conversation as I made coffee. Completely out of character. Suspicious. Need to talk. She ended the call as I walked into the kitchen. Dennis? I asked innocently. A client, she replied, but her cheeks flushed slightly. About the Westport listing. I poured my coffee and sat down at the kitchen table. Did you call Dennis about our house? Not yet. I wanted to make sure you hadn't changed your mind. Why would I change my mind? Because yesterday you thought his offer was suspicious, and today you're ready to accept it. That's a pretty big shift. I shrugged. I thought about what you said, about people growing apart, wanting different things. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's time for a change. Lila studied my face like she was trying to read a foreign language. What kind of change? I don't know yet. That's the exciting part, isn't it? The unknown. She poured herself coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. Evan, if there's something you want to talk about, like what? I don't know. Us. Our marriage. Whether you're happy. The irony was breathtaking. She was asking if I was happy while carrying on an affair behind my back, but I kept my expression neutral. Are you asking because you're unhappy? No, I don't know. Things have felt different lately. Different how? Distant. Like we're going through the motions. I nodded thoughtfully. I've felt that too. Maybe selling the house is exactly what we need. A fresh start. Relief flickered across her face. So, you'll call Dennis? Actually, I was hoping you'd do it. You're the real estate expert. Of course. She was already reaching for her phone. I'll set up a meeting for later today. Perfect. I'll be at the Morrison job site most of the day, so you two can work out the details. I left for work feeling like a chess player who just moved his queen into position. Lila thought she was getting what she wanted, a clear path to be with Dennis. What she didn't realize was that I was about to make their lives very complicated. The Morrison project was a kitchen renovation in Darien, the kind of high-end job that kept my business afloat. But I had trouble concentrating on cabinet measurements and tile selections. My mind kept drifting to what Lila and Dennis were probably discussing. Around noon, I got a text from Lila. Meeting with D went well. He's excited to move forward. Home late tonight. Client dinner. Client dinner. Right. I finished up at the Morrison house and drove home, but instead of going inside, I parked at the end of the street and waited. Sure enough, around 6 o'clock, Lila's car pulled into Dennis's driveway. I waited another hour, then walked over and rang the doorbell. Dennis answered the door looking flustered. His hair was messed up, and his shirt was buttoned wrong. "Evan, what are you doing here?" "Looking for my wife. Her car's in your driveway. We were going over the purchase agreement." "Great. Mind if I take a look?" Before he could answer, Lila appeared behind him, smoothing down her skirt. Her lipstick was smudged, and there was a guilty flush in her cheeks. "Evan, I thought you were working late." "Finished early. Thought I'd stop by and see how the negotiations were going." The three of us stood there in an awkward triangle, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. "Everything's going smoothly," Dennis said finally. "Standard purchase agreement, standard terms." "Excellent." I smiled at both of them. "Mind if I see the paperwork?" Dennis and Lila exchanged glances. "It's not quite ready yet," Lila said. "We were just discussing some of the details." "What kind of details?" "Closing date, inspection timeline, that sort of thing." "I see." I looked around Dennis's living room, noting the 2 wine glasses on the coffee table, the couch cushions that looked like someone had been lying on them. "Well, don't let me interrupt. I'll just wait at home for the final version." I turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, Lila, don't forget about dinner with the Hendersons tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. Lila's face went blank. "Dinner with the Hendersons? The couple from the party. You said you wanted to get to know them better, so I invited them over." When did I say that?" "Last night when you were talking about expanding our social circle. Don't you remember?" She clearly didn't remember because she'd never said it, but now she was trapped. She couldn't contradict me without looking foolish in front of Dennis. "Of course," she said weakly. 7 o'clock. "Perfect. Dennis, you should join us. After all, we're practically family now." Dennis looked like he'd rather eat glass. "That's very kind, but I insist. It'll be fun. We can celebrate our new business relationship." I walked home feeling satisfied. The dinner party was completely fictional, but now Lila would have to scramble to make it real, and Dennis would have to sit through an evening of pretending to be nothing more than our friendly neighbor. It was a small victory, but it felt good. The next morning, Lila was in full panic mode. She'd already called the Hendersons to invite them to a dinner party she'd never planned, and now she was frantically trying to figure out what to cook. "What did you tell them we were serving?" she asked, pulling cookbooks off the shelf. "I didn't get specific. Just said it would be casual." "Casual doesn't help me plan a menu, Evan." "Then make it simple. Pasta, salad, garlic bread. They're not food critics." She glared at me. "Since when do you invite people over without discussing it with me first?" "Since you started making major life decisions without discussing them with me." The words hung in the air between us. Lila's face went pale. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means maybe we should both try to communicate better." She stared at me for a long moment, then went back to her cookbooks without another word. The dinner party was exactly as awkward as I'd hoped it would be. The Hendersons arrived promptly at 7, bearing flowers and wine. Dennis showed up 10 minutes later, looking like he was attending his own execution. "Dennis!" Mrs. Henderson exclaimed. "How lovely to see you again!" "Likewise," Dennis replied, but his smile looked painted on. I played the perfect host, making sure everyone's wine glasses stayed full and steering the conversation toward safe topics like the weather and local politics. But I could feel the undercurrent of tension between Lila and Dennis, the careful way they avoided looking at each other directly. "So, Dennis," Mr. Henderson said over the main course, "Lila tells us you're buying their house. That's exciting." Dennis nearly choked on his wine. "It's still in the early stages." "But you made an offer," I added helpfully. "A very generous one." $450, wasn't it? Mrs. Henderson asked. That seems like a lot for this neighborhood. The market's strong right now, Dennis said weakly. Still, it's unusual to pay above market value unless there's something special about the property. Mr. Henderson was an accountant, and he had that analytical mind that picked at details. What attracted you to their house specifically? Dennis looked like he wanted to disappear. Good bones, nice layout. But your house is so much bigger, Mrs. Henderson observed. Are you downsizing? Something like that. I decided to help him out. Dennis thinks change is good for people. Fresh starts and all that. Oh, absolutely, Mrs. Henderson agreed. Sometimes you need to shake things up. Keep life interesting. Lila had been quiet through most of the dinner, but now she spoke up. Not everyone likes change. Some people prefer stability. True, I said, but sometimes change finds you whether you want it or not. The conversation continued, but I could see Dennis getting more uncomfortable by the minute. Every innocent question from the Hendersons felt like an interrogation, and every comment I made seemed loaded with double meaning. By the time dessert was served, Dennis looked like he needed medical attention. This has been lovely, he said, checking his watch. But I have an early meeting tomorrow. Of course, I said. Thanks for coming. It's so nice when neighbors can be friends. After everyone left, Lila and I cleaned up in silence. I could feel her anger radiating like heat from a furnace. That was cruel, she said finally. What was cruel? You know what? Putting Dennis in that position, making him squirm. I was just being friendly. Isn't that what neighbors do? She turned to face me, her eyes blazing. What's your game, Evan? What are you really doing? I'm not playing any games. I'm just trying to understand why our neighbor is so interested in buying our house. He told you why. He told me a lot of things. Doesn't mean they're true. Lila stared at me for a long moment, then shook her head. I'm going to bed. This conversation is going nowhere. After she went upstairs, I sat in the kitchen thinking about the evening. Dennis had looked genuinely rattled, which meant he was starting to see me as more than just an obstacle. That was good. Rattled people made mistakes, and I was counting on Dennis to make a big one. The next few days passed in a strange kind of détente. Lila went about her normal routine, but I could feel her watching me, trying to figure out what I was planning. Dennis, meanwhile, seemed to be avoiding me entirely. His Range Rover disappeared early each morning and didn't return until after dark. But I knew their affair was continuing. The signs were subtle but unmistakable. Lila's sudden interest in working late, her new habit of showering as soon as she got home, the way she guarded her phone like it contained state secrets. What they didn't know was that I'd installed a tracking app on Lila's phone. Nothing illegal or invasive, just a family safety app that showed location data. Purely for security purposes, of course. According to the app, Lila had been spending a lot of time at a hotel in Stamford, the same hotel where she'd supposedly been meeting clients for lunch. It was time for phase 2 of my plan. I called my old college roommate, Cal Morrison. Cal ran a private security business now, mostly corporate stuff, but he'd helped me out with a few sketchy contractors over the years. Evan, how's suburban life treating you? Can't complain. Listen, I need a favor. What kind of favor? The kind that requires discretion and a good camera. Cal was quiet for a moment. This about Lila? What makes you say that? Because you sound like a man whose world just fell apart. Plus, you're asking for surveillance equipment. I gave him the short version, the affair, the house sale, the whole mess. Cal listened without interrupting. So what's the plan? He asked when I finished. I want evidence. Photos, video, whatever you can get. Evidence for what? Divorce proceedings? Maybe. Or maybe I just want them to know that I know. That's a dangerous game, my friend. I'm already playing a dangerous game. I just want better cards. Cal sighed. When do you need this? Soon. They're getting careless. I'll see what I can do. 2 days later, Cal delivered a package containing a high-resolution camera with a telephoto lens and a recording device that looked like a pen. Professional-grade equipment that could capture clear images from a considerable distance. Just remember, he warned, once you go down this road, there's no going back. I'm already past the point of no return. That afternoon, I followed Lila to the hotel in Stamford. She met Dennis in the parking lot, and they went inside together like they'd done it 100 times before. I waited in my car with the camera, feeling like a private investigator in a bad movie. But when they came out 2 hours later, I got the shots I needed. Clear, unmistakable images of my wife and Dennis Harper leaving a hotel together, looking guilty and satisfied. But photos weren't enough. I wanted more. The next week, I told Lila I was going to a building supply expo in Hartford and would be gone overnight. Instead, I checked into the same hotel in Stamford and waited. Sure enough, they showed up around noon. I followed them upstairs and used the recording pen to capture audio through the thin hotel room walls. What I heard was worse than I'd expected. They weren't just having an affair, they were planning my complete destruction. He's starting to suspect something. Lila's voice came through clearly. So what? There's nothing he can do about it. You don't know Evan like I do. He's not as passive as he seems. He's a house flipper, Lila. Not exactly intimidating. He used to be an architect. He's smart, methodical. If he's onto us, he's planning something. Like what? I don't know, but that dinner party wasn't random. He was sending us a message. Dennis laughed. What message? That he can cook pasta? That he knows Dennis, and that he's not going to make this easy. Then we make it easy for him. We accelerate the timeline. What do you mean? I mean we stop playing games. You file for divorce, I buy the house from you instead of him, and we move on with our lives. It's not that simple. Connecticut is a no-fault state, but adultery can still affect property division. Not if he can't prove anything. He's been acting strange, Dennis. What if he already has proof? There was a long pause. When Dennis spoke again, his voice was harder. Then we make sure he doesn't get a chance to use it. I felt a chill run down my spine. That sounded like a threat. What are you saying? I'm saying accidents happen, Lila. People have car trouble, slip and fall, get mugged in parking lots. Dennis, no. I'm not talking about hurting him. I'm not talking about hurting him either. I'm talking about discrediting him, making him look unstable, paranoid. Who's going to believe a man who's having a nervous breakdown? How? Leave that to me. I have connections. I'd heard enough. I packed up my equipment and left the hotel, my mind racing. They weren't just planning to leave me, they were planning to destroy me, but two could play that game. It was time for Phase 3. I drove home from Stamford with my hands shaking and my mind spinning. The recording I'd just made changed everything. This wasn't just about an affair anymore. Dennis was talking about actively sabotaging my life. But instead of fear, I felt something else. Clarity. For months, I'd been reacting to their moves, trying to figure out their game. Now, I knew exactly what they were planning, which meant I could plan accordingly. The first thing I did was make copies of everything, the photos, the recordings, the emails. I stored them in multiple locations, a safety deposit box, Cal's office, and a cloud storage account that only I could access. If something happened to me, the evidence would still exist. The second thing I did was start building my own network. I began with Maya Rodriguez, the bartender at Flanagan's, the local pub where half the neighborhood went to gossip and unwind. Maya had been working there for 5 years, and she knew everyone's business. More importantly, she was smart, observant, and had no love for people who thought they were better than everyone else. Dennis Harper, she said when I mentioned his name. Yeah, I know him. Comes in here with different women, always trying to impress them with expensive drinks and stories about his real estate deals. Different women? Your wife's not the first, if that's what you're asking. Maya wiped down a glass with practiced efficiency. Guy's got a type. Married, successful, looking for excitement. Has he been in here with Lila? A few times. Always sits in the corner booth, always pays cash. She looked at me with sympathy. I'm sorry, Evan. I wondered if you knew. I know now. Question is, what am I going to do about it? Maya leaned across the bar. What do you want to do about it? I want them to understand that actions have consequences. She smiled. I like the sound of that. What do you need? I explained my situation. Not everything, but enough. Maya listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. So you want to expose them, she said when I finished. Eventually. But first, I want them to sweat. I can help with that. This place is gossip central. A few well-placed comments, some strategic questions, and the whole neighborhood will be buzzing. I don't want it traced back to me. Leave that to me. I'm a professional. The next person I recruited was Mrs. Kowalski. The elderly woman was lonely, observant, and had a natural talent for gathering information. She also had a network of other retirees who spent their days watching the neighborhood like it was their own personal soap opera. I knew something was going on, she said when I visited her under the pretense of borrowing a ladder. The way they looked at each other at your party, the way she's been coming and going at odd hours. I'm trying to figure out what to do about it. What do you want to do? I want the truth to come out, but I want it to happen naturally, not like I'm the jealous husband making accusations. Mrs. Kowalski nodded sagely. Sometimes the truth has a way of revealing itself, especially when people get careless. They're definitely getting careless. Then maybe they need a little help getting caught. The third member of my unofficial team was my sister Olivia, who practiced family law in Hartford. I called her on a Saturday morning, ostensibly to catch up, but really to get legal advice. Hypothetically, I said, if someone were to discover their spouse was having an affair and planning to financially ruin them, what would be the best way to protect themselves? Hypothetically, Olivia replied dryly, that someone should document everything, secure their assets, and consult with a good divorce attorney. What if they wanted to fight back instead of just protecting themselves? Fighting back is dangerous, Evan. It can backfire spectacularly. But not illegal, right? As long as everything they do is within the law? Depends on what everything includes. What exactly are we talking about here? I gave her a sanitized version of the situation. Olivia listened with the professional detachment of someone who'd heard worse stories. Your wife and her boyfriend are playing with fire, she said when I finished. If they're planning to manipulate property division through fraud or intimidation, they're committing crimes. So what should I do? Document everything, build an airtight case, and let the legal system handle it. And if the legal system takes too long, then you wait anyway. Vigilante justice feels good in the moment, but it usually ends badly. I thanked Olivia for her advice, knowing I wasn't going to take it. The legal system was slow, expensive, and unpredictable. I wanted justice that was fast, certain, and personally satisfying. Over the next week, I watched my plan unfold. Maya started asking casual questions at the bar. Had anyone noticed Dennis Harper spending a lot of time with married women? Wasn't it strange that he wanted to buy the Merrill house when his own place was so much nicer? Mrs. Kowalski began her own intelligence-gathering operation, striking up conversations with neighbors about the unusual real estate situation on Maple Street. Wasn't it odd that Dennis was paying so much above market value? Did anyone else think there might be more to the story? Meanwhile, I played the role of the oblivious husband, going about my normal routine while carefully planting seeds of doubt. Dennis seems really eager to close on the house, I mentioned to Tom Bradley, who lived 3 houses down. Almost like he's in a hurry for some reason. Maybe he's got another buyer lined up, Tom suggested. Could be. Or maybe he's got other reasons for wanting us out of the neighborhood. The comment was vague enough to be innocent, but specific enough to make Tom curious. I knew he'd mention it to his wife, who'd mention it to her book club, who'd spread it through their own networks. Within days, the neighborhood gossip mill was humming with speculation about Dennis Harper and his mysterious interest in our house. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. I was working in my garage on a Saturday morning when Patricia Harper showed up at my door. Dennis's ex-wife was a striking woman in her early 40s with the kind of polished appearance that spoke of money and good breeding, but there was steel underneath the polish. "Mr. Merrill, I'm Patricia Harper. I believe you know my ex-husband." "Dennis, yes, we're neighbors." "May I come in? I have something I think you should know." I led her into the kitchen, where she accepted coffee and got straight to the point. "Dennis is trying to buy your house." "That's right. How did you know?" "Because he tried the same thing with the Kowalskis, the Bradleys, and 2 other families on this street. He wants to own multiple properties in this neighborhood." I felt a chill. "Why?" "Because he's planning to develop the entire block, turn it into high-end condos." Patricia sipped her coffee calmly. "He's been working on this for 2 years, buying up properties through shell companies and straw buyers. That would require zoning changes, city approval, which he's been arranging through his connections on the Planning Commission. Dennis has a gift for corruption, Mr. Merrill. It's one of the things that ended our marriage." I stared at her, trying to process this information. "If this is true, why are you telling me?" "Because I know what Dennis is capable of when he wants something, and because I suspect your wife is involved." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Dennis doesn't just have affairs, Mr. Merrill. He recruits accomplices, women who can help him with his schemes." Patricia's voice was matter-of-fact, but her eyes were hard. "Your wife is a real estate agent. She has access to property records, zoning information, client lists. She's useful to him." "You think Lila is helping him manipulate the real estate market?" "I think your wife is in deeper than she realizes. And when Dennis is done with her, he'll destroy her, just like he tried to destroy me." Patricia reached into her purse and pulled out a thick folder. "These are copies of documents from our divorce proceedings, financial records, business dealings, evidence of fraud. I think you'll find them enlightening." I took the folder with hands that weren't quite steady. "Why are you giving me this?" "Because Dennis Harper needs to be stopped, and because sometimes the enemy of your enemy is your friend." After Patricia left, I spent the rest of the day going through her documents. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Dennis wasn't just a serial adulterer, he was a career criminal. The papers detailed a pattern of real estate fraud, tax evasion, and market manipulation going back years. He'd used his charm and connections to build a network of accomplices, most of them women who thought they were in love with him. But the most damaging information was recent. Bank records showed large cash deposits in accounts linked to Dennis, payments that corresponded with property sales in our neighborhood. Someone was feeding him inside information about which houses were likely to come on the market, and that someone had access to confidential real estate data. Someone like my wife. I felt sick as the pieces fell into place. Lila hadn't just been having an affair. She'd been helping Dennis manipulate the local real estate market. The client meetings she'd been attending were actually planning sessions. The late nights at the office were spent gathering intelligence on potential targets. My wife wasn't just a cheater, she was a criminal. But instead of despair, I felt something else. Opportunity. If Dennis and Lila were breaking the law, they were vulnerable. And vulnerable people made mistakes. It was time to force them into making a big one. I spent Sunday planning my next move. The evidence Patricia had given me was damaging, but it wasn't enough to guarantee convictions. I needed them to incriminate themselves further, and I needed it on record. Monday morning, I called Dennis and asked to meet about the house sale. "I've been thinking about your offer," I told him, "and I'm ready to move forward." Excellent. Dennis sounded genuinely pleased. When can we close? That's what I want to discuss. I might be willing to expedite things, but I'd need some assurances. What kind of assurances? The kind that are better discussed in person. Can you meet me at Flanagan's tonight? Say, 7 o'clock? Dennis agreed, probably thinking he was about to close the deal of the century. What he didn't know was that Maya would be working that night, and that she'd agreed to help me record our conversation. I called Lila next. Dennis and I are meeting tonight to finalize the house sale, I told her. I thought you should be there, since you're handling the real estate side. That's not necessary, Evan. Dennis and I can work out the details later. Actually, I'd prefer to have everything documented properly. You know how complicated these transactions can be. There was a long pause. What aren't you telling me? Nothing. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Fine. 7 o'clock at Flanagan's? Perfect. That evening, I arrived at Flanagan's early and took a corner booth where Maya had placed a recording device. The pub was busy enough to provide cover but quiet enough for clear audio. Dennis arrived first, looking confident and relaxed. He ordered an expensive whiskey and made small talk about the weather while we waited for Lila. She showed up 10 minutes later, looking nervous. The three of us sitting together felt surreal, like a parody of a business meeting. So, Dennis said, raising his glass. To new beginnings. To new beginnings, I agreed. Though I have to admit I'm curious about the details of your development plans. Dennis nearly choked on his whiskey. Development plans? For the neighborhood, Patricia Harper filled me in on your real estate strategy. The color drained from Dennis's face. Lila looked confused. What development plans? She asked. Dennis didn't tell you? I turned to him with mock surprise. About the condo project? The zoning changes? The shell companies? I don't know what Patricia told you, Dennis said carefully. But my ex-wife has a vivid imagination. Does she? Because the bank records seem pretty concrete. Now Lila was staring at Dennis with growing alarm. What bank records? Dennis, what is he talking about? He's talking nonsense, Dennis said, but sweat was beading on his forehead. Patricia is trying to cause trouble. The way she caused trouble when she accused you of fraud during your divorce? I asked. The fraud that's documented in court records? Dennis stood up abruptly. I don't have to listen to this. Sit down, Dennis. My voice was quiet but firm. We're not done talking. He hesitated, then sat back down. The pub continued buzzing around us, but our corner felt isolated, tense. Here's what I think happened, I continued. You moved to our neighborhood with a plan to buy up multiple properties for development. You needed inside information about which houses might come on the market, so you recruited a local real estate agent to help you. Lila's face had gone pale. Evan, you seduced my wife, convinced her she was special, made her think you loved her, but really, she was just another tool in your scheme. That's not true, Dennis said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Because according to these bank records, Lila's been receiving payments from your shell companies for months. Payments that correspond with confidential information about property sales in our area. I pulled out copies of the financial documents Patricia had given me and spread them on the table. Lila stared at them like they were written in a foreign language. I didn't know, she stammered. You didn't know that the consulting fees Dennis was paying you were actually bribes? I asked. You didn't know that sharing confidential client information was illegal? They weren't bribes, Dennis snapped. They were legitimate consulting payments. For what services? Market analysis, neighborhood assessment. Using confidential information from your real estate database, I said to Lila. Information you access through your professional license. The implications were sinking in now. Lila looked like she was going to be sick. This is entrapment, Dennis said. You can't use any of this. Actually, I can. Because you're not under arrest and this isn't a courtroom. This is just a conversation between neighbors. I leaned back in my chair, watching them both squirm. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to withdraw your offer on my house. You're going to end whatever relationship you have with my wife. And you're going to find somewhere else to pursue your real estate ambitions. And if we don't? Dennis asked. Then I take this evidence to the state attorney general, the real estate commission, and the IRS. I'm guessing they'll be very interested in your business practices. Dennis stared at me with pure hatred. You think you're so smart. Smart enough to know when I'm being manipulated. This isn't over, Evan. Yes, it is. He stood up and threw a 20 on the table. You have no idea what you're messing with. I know exactly what I'm messing with. The question is whether you do. Dennis left without another word. Lila remained seated, staring at the documents spread across the table. How long have you known? She asked quietly. About the affair? Weeks. About the fraud? Since yesterday. I never meant for it to go this far. But it did go this far. And now we have to deal with the consequences. Lila looked up at me with tears in her eyes. What happens now? Now we figure out how to clean up the mess you've made. I gathered up the documents and stood to leave. I'll be staying at Cal's for a few days while I decide what to do next. I suggest you use that time to think about whether you want to try to save our marriage or hire a good criminal defense attorney. Evan, wait. But I was already walking away, leaving her alone in the corner booth with the weight of her choices pressing down on her like a stone. Outside in the parking lot, I took a deep breath of cool evening air. Phase 3 was complete. Now it was time for the final act. I spent 3 days at Cal's place, letting Lila and Dennis wonder what I was planning next. Cal's apartment was a sparse, masculine space that reflected his military background. Functional furniture, no clutter, everything in its place. It was exactly what I needed to clear my head and plan my endgame. You've got them rattled, Cal observed over breakfast on the third morning. Question is, what's your next move? I'm still working on that. Because if you're looking for advice, I'd say you've already won. You've got evidence of fraud, adultery, and conspiracy. Take it to court and move on with your life. It's not about winning in court, Cal. It's about making sure they understand the full cost of what they've done. Cal studied my face. That's a dangerous mindset, brother. Revenge has a way of consuming people. This isn't about revenge. It's about justice. Same thing sometimes. Maybe he was right, but I was past the point of caring about the distinction. Dennis and Lila had tried to destroy my life, and I wanted them to understand what that felt like. My phone buzzed with a text from Lila. Please come home. We need to talk. I showed the message to Cal. Think it's a trap? Only one way to find out. I drove back to Maple Street that afternoon, noting that Dennis's Range Rover wasn't in his driveway. The neighborhood looked peaceful, normal, nothing like the war zone it had become in my mind. Lila met me at the door, and I was shocked by her appearance. She looked like she'd aged years in 3 days. Her eyes were red from crying, her hair was unkempt, and she was wearing the same clothes I'd seen her in at Flanagan's. Thank you for coming, she said quietly. What did you want to talk about? Everything. The affair, the money, Dennis's plans. She led me into the living room, where she'd spread documents across the coffee table. I've been going through my files, trying to figure out how deep I'm in. I sat down across from her, maintaining distance. And I'm in deep, Evan. Deeper than I realized. She handed me a folder thick with papers. These are all the properties Dennis asked me to research over the past year. All the client information I shared with him. All the consulting fees he paid me. I flipped through the documents, seeing the scope of their operation for the first time. It wasn't just our neighborhood. Dennis had been targeting properties all over Fairfield County, using Lila's access to confidential real estate data to identify opportunities. Jesus, Lila, do you understand what this means? It means I'm probably going to prison. Her matter-of-fact tone surprised me. Is that why you called me back? Because you need help with damage control? I called you back because I owe you an explanation and an apology. I waited, saying nothing. I never meant for it to happen, she continued. The affair, I mean. Dennis was just so confident, charming. He made me feel special. Special enough to betray your marriage? I know how it sounds, but things between us had been stale, routine. I felt like we were just going through the motions. So you decided to have an affair instead of talking to me about it. I decided to feel alive again. Dennis made me feel alive. I looked at the woman I'd married, trying to reconcile her with the stranger sitting across from me. When did it become about money? It didn't start that way. At first, Dennis just asked casual questions about the real estate market. Which neighborhoods were hot, which properties might come available. It seemed harmless. When did it stop seeming harmless? When he started paying me. He said it was consulting work, that he valued my expertise. The money was good, and I convinced myself I wasn't doing anything wrong. Even though you were sharing confidential client information? I told myself it was just market analysis, general trends, not specific details. But it wasn't just general trends, was it? Lila shook her head, tears starting to flow again. No. He wanted more and more specific information, client financial data, personal details, family situations, anything that might indicate someone was ready to sell. And you gave it to him. I gave it to him because I was in love with him, or thought I was. What changed? You did. The way you handled the dinner party, the questions you asked, the way you looked at me. I realized you knew something was wrong. So, you decided to come clean? I decided to find out what Dennis was really planning. So I started asking questions. Lila pulled out another document, a zoning application for a high-density residential development covering 6 blocks of our neighborhood. He's not just buying houses, Evan. He's planning to tear down the entire area and build luxury condos. 300 units, starting at $800,000 each. I stared at the application, doing the math in my head. That's a $250 million project. And it's been in the works for 3 years. Dennis has been systematically buying properties through shell companies, bribing zoning officials, and manipulating the market to drive down prices. Using information you provided. Using information I provided, she admitted. I'm an accessory to fraud, conspiracy, and probably a dozen other crimes. I set down the documents and looked at her. Why are you telling me this now? Because Dennis is planning to throw me under the bus. I found out yesterday. How? He called me after you confronted us at Flanagan's. He was furious, paranoid. He said you were a threat that needed to be eliminated. I felt a chill. Eliminated how? He didn't say specifically, but he made it clear that if this whole thing collapsed, I was going to take the fall for it. And you believed him? I believed him because I've seen what he did to Patricia, and because I've seen the kind of people he works with. What kind of people? Lila hesitated. The kind who solve problems with violence, Evan. Dennis isn't just a white-collar criminal. He's connected to some very dangerous people. The room felt suddenly cold. Are you saying he's threatening me? I'm saying he views you as an obstacle to a $250 million payday. What do you think? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our quiet suburban street. It was hard to believe that underneath all the normalcy was a web of corruption and criminal conspiracy. What do you want from me, Lila? I want to make this right. I want to help you stop Dennis before someone gets hurt. Why should I trust you? Because I don't have anyone else to turn to, and because despite everything I've done, I still love you. I turned back to face her. Love me enough to testify against Dennis? If that's what it takes. Love me enough to go to prison if necessary? If that's what it takes. Love me enough to help me destroy him completely? Lila stared at me for a long moment. What did you have in mind? I sat back down and leaned forward. I want Dennis Harper to lose everything. His money, his freedom, his reputation, his connections. I want him to understand what it feels like to have your life torn apart by someone you trusted. That's a tall order. Good thing we have inside information. Over the next hour, I laid out my plan. It was complex, risky, and probably illegal. But it would work if Lila was willing to play her part. "You want me to wear a wire?" she asked when I finished explaining. "I want you to get Dennis to confess to everything. The fraud, the bribes, the threats, all of it on tape. He'll never admit to that stuff. He will if he thinks you're in danger. If he thinks the FBI is closing in and you're both about to be arrested. How do we make him think that? We stage a raid." Lila looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "A fake FBI raid?" "Not fake. Real, but controlled." I explained the rest of my plan. Cal had connections in federal law enforcement, former military buddies who'd gone into government work. With the right approach, we could get the FBI interested in Dennis's operation without implicating Lila immediately. "They'd want to flip you," I told her. "Use you as an informant to gather evidence against Dennis and his associates. And in exchange, immunity, or at least a reduced sentence." Lila was quiet for a long time, thinking it through. "This is incredibly dangerous, Evan. If Dennis figures out what we're doing, then we better make sure he doesn't figure it out. And if something goes wrong? If the FBI decides I'm too valuable as a defendant to use as an informant? Then you go to prison, but at least Dennis goes down with you." She laughed bitterly. "That's not much of a sales pitch." "It's the best I can offer. You made your choices, Lila. Now you have to live with the consequences." "What about us? Our marriage?" I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since this whole mess began. She was still beautiful, still the woman I'd fallen in love with 8 years ago. But she was also a stranger, someone capable of betrayal and criminal conspiracy. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe we can rebuild something from the wreckage. Maybe we can't. But first, we have to survive the crash." Lila nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll do it. I'll help you take down Dennis." "Are you sure? Because once we start this, there's no going back." "I'm sure. Dennis Harper destroyed my life. It's time to return the favor." I called Cal that evening and asked him to reach out to his FBI contacts. Within 24 hours, we had a meeting set up with Special Agent Sarah Chen, who specialized in white-collar crime and public corruption. Agent Chen was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 30s, with the kind of sharp intelligence that made you choose your words carefully. She listened to our story without interruption, occasionally taking notes or asking clarifying questions. "This is a significant operation," she said when we finished. "Multiple federal crimes, public corruption, organized criminal activity. If even half of what you're telling me is true, we're looking at a major case." "What do you need from us?" I asked. "Evidence, documentation, and cooperation from your wife." She turned to Lila. "Mrs. Merrill, you understand that you're confessing to serious federal crimes?" "Yes." "And you're willing to cooperate fully with our investigation?" "Yes." "That means wearing recording devices, participating in controlled meetings, and potentially testifying in court against people who might want to hurt you." Lila's voice was steady. "I understand." Agent Chen made some notes. "We'll need time to verify your information and build a case. In the meantime, you both need to act normal. Don't change your routines. Don't avoid Dennis. Don't do anything that might make him suspicious." "How long will this take?" I asked. "Weeks, possibly months. Building a solid case takes time." "What if Dennis gets suspicious? What if he decides to cut his losses and disappear?" "Then we move faster. But for now, patience is our best strategy." As we left the FBI field office, I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. We'd set the wheels in motion, but the outcome was far from certain. "No regrets?" I asked Lila as we drove home. Plenty of regrets, but not about this. Good, because the hard part is just beginning. That night, we slept in the same house for the first time in a week. Not in the same bed. That bridge would take time to rebuild, if it could be rebuilt at all. But under the same roof, working toward the same goal. It felt like a beginning, or maybe an ending. Only time would tell which. 3 weeks into the FBI operation, Dennis was getting sloppy. The pressure of maintaining his normal routine while knowing that federal agents might be watching was taking its toll. He'd started drinking more, sleeping less, and making mistakes that would have been unthinkable for someone of his usual cunning. Lila had been wearing a wire to their meetings, gathering evidence of Dennis's criminal operation with methodical precision. The recordings were damning. Discussions of bribes paid to zoning officials, plans to intimidate property owners into selling below market value, and detailed breakdowns of the money laundering scheme he'd used to hide his profits. But it was the conversation from Tuesday afternoon that sealed his fate. "I think Evan knows more than he's letting on," Lila said, following the script Agent Chen had provided. "What makes you say that?" Dennis asked. They were in his car, driving through a residential area in Stamford where Dennis was scouting potential properties. "He's been asking questions about my work, about the clients I've been consulting for. And yesterday I caught him going through my computer." Dennis's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What did he find?" "I don't know, but he was in my office for over an hour." "This is bad, Lila. If Evan has evidence of our arrangement..." "What do you mean, bad?" "I mean, we might need to accelerate our timeline, get you out of that house and away from your husband before he can cause real damage. I can't just leave Dennis. We're married. We have assets, property. None of that matters if we're in federal prison." The recording device picked up the sound of Dennis pulling over to the side of the road. When he spoke again, his voice was harder, more dangerous. "Listen to me carefully, Lila. This operation is worth more money than you can imagine. I've got investors, partners, people who've put serious capital into this project. If it falls apart because your husband is playing detective, there will be consequences." "What kind of consequences?" "The kind where people get hurt." "Dennis, you're scaring me." "Good. You should be scared. Because if Evan Merrill brings down this deal, he's not going to live to enjoy his victory." The threat was clear, unambiguous, and recorded in high-definition audio. Agent Chen called me that evening with barely contained excitement. "We've got him," she said. "Conspiracy, fraud, money laundering, and now criminal threats. Dennis Harper is going down hard." "When do you move?" "Tomorrow morning. We'll hit his house, his office, and the properties he's been using as fronts simultaneously." "What about Lila?" "She'll be fine. We'll bring her in for questioning as part of the show, but she's protected under her cooperation agreement." "And me? You stay home and act surprised when the FBI shows up to question you about your neighbor's criminal activities." I hung up the phone, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and nervousness. After weeks of planning, the endgame was finally here. The raids began at dawn. I watched from my bedroom window as black SUVs surrounded Dennis's house and federal agents in tactical gear poured out. They moved with military precision, securing the perimeter before approaching the front door. I couldn't hear what was said, but I saw Dennis answer the door in his bathrobe, his face a mask of shock and confusion. Within minutes, he was in handcuffs, being led to one of the waiting vehicles. 20 minutes later, Agent Chen knocked on my door. "Mr. Merrill, FBI, we need to ask you some questions about your neighbor, Dennis Harper." I played my part perfectly. Confused, cooperative, slightly intimidated by the presence of federal agents in my living room. Agent Chen asked about Dennis's offer to buy our house, about any unusual behavior I might have noticed, about my wife's professional relationship with him. "I knew something was off," I said, sticking to the script we'd rehearsed. "The offer was too generous, too urgent, but I never imagined anything like this. Your wife is also being questioned." Agent Chen informed me. She may have unknowingly provided information that Dennis Harper used in his criminal activities. Is she in trouble? That depends on what we find. But if she cooperates fully with our investigation, we'll take that into consideration. The performance was flawless. By the time Agent Chen left, half the neighborhood had gathered on the street to watch the drama unfold. Mrs. Kowalski was practically vibrating with excitement, and I could see other neighbors making phone calls, spreading the news through their networks. Dennis Harper's reputation was destroyed before lunch. The local news picked up the story that evening. Federal agents arrested a Connecticut man today on charges related to an alleged real estate fraud scheme. The reporter stood in front of Dennis's house, which was now wrapped in yellow crime scene tape. I watched the coverage with grim satisfaction. This was what justice looked like, not the slow, uncertain process of divorce court, but swift, decisive action that left no room for manipulation or escape. Lila came home that evening, looking exhausted but relieved. The FBI had questioned her for hours, building the foundation for her eventual testimony against Dennis and his associates. "How did it go?" I asked. "They have everything they need. Bank records, communications, witness statements. Dennis is finished." "What about his threat against me?" "That recording will probably add another 10 years to his sentence." We sat in our living room, the same room where we'd entertained the Hendersons just weeks earlier, and tried to process what had happened to our lives. "So what now?" Lila asked. "Now we figure out how to move forward." "Together?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and tried to see past the betrayal to the woman I'd married. "I don't know yet. Trust takes time to rebuild." "I understand." "Do you? Because this isn't just about forgiveness, Lila. It's about whether we can build something real from the wreckage of what we had." "I want to try." "Wanting isn't enough. You'll need to prove it. Every day for however long it takes." She nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes." "We'll see." The next few weeks brought a parade of revelations as the FBI investigation expanded. Dennis's criminal network was larger and more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. Property developers, zoning officials, bank executives, dozens of people were arrested as the conspiracy unraveled. The media coverage was relentless. Our neighborhood became a tourist attraction for crime buffs and curious locals. Reporters knocked on doors, asking for interviews and background information. I gave exactly one interview to a reporter from the Hartford Courant who seemed genuinely interested in the human side of the story. "How does it feel to know that your neighbor was planning to destroy your entire neighborhood?" she asked. "Surreal," I replied. "You think you know the people around you, but sometimes you don't know them at all." "What made you suspicious of Mr. Harper's motives?" "The offer was too good to be true. In my experience, when something seems too good to be true, it usually is." "Do you feel vindicated by his arrest?" I thought about that question for a long time before answering. I feel like justice was served. But vindicated? I'm not sure anyone wins in a situation like this. The article ran on the front page of the Sunday edition, with a photo of our house and a headline that read, "Neighbor's Suspicion Helps Uncover $1 Million Fraud Scheme." Dennis Harper was eventually sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. His associates received sentences ranging from probation to 8 years, depending on their level of involvement. The properties he'd acquired through fraud were sold at auction, with the proceeds going to compensate his victims. Lila received 2 years of probation and community service in exchange for her cooperation. She also lost her real estate license permanently, ending the career she'd spent a decade building. "Any regrets?" I asked her one evening as we watched the news coverage of Dennis's sentencing. "About cooperating with the FBI?" "No." "About the affair?" "Every day." "About us?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I regret what I did to us. but I don't regret fighting to save what's left. 6 months after Dennis's arrest, Lila and I were still living in the same house, still trying to rebuild our marriage. It was slow, difficult work that required constant attention and commitment from both of us. Some days were better than others. Some days, I could almost forget what had happened and focus on moving forward. Other days, the betrayal felt as fresh as if I'd just discovered it. But we were trying. That had to count for something. "Do you think we'll make it?" Lila asked one morning over coffee. "I think we have a chance," I replied. "A better chance than Dennis Harper has of ever seeing freedom again." She smiled at that, and for a moment it felt like old times. The neighborhood eventually returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after such upheaval. New families moved into the houses that had been owned by Dennis's shell companies. The zoning applications were withdrawn. The development project was permanently shelved. Mrs. Kowalski became something of a local celebrity, giving interviews about her role in exposing the conspiracy. She started a neighborhood watch program that was really just an excuse to gossip more systematically about everyone's business. Maya at Flanagan's still asked about the case whenever I stopped by for a drink. She'd helped me when I needed it most, and I'd never forget that. Cal remained my closest friend and advisor, though he still worried that my quest for justice had changed me in ways I didn't fully understand. "You got what you wanted," he said one evening when we were having dinner at his place. "Dennis is in prison, Lila is trying to make amends, and your marriage might actually survive. So why don't you seem happy?" "Who says I'm not happy?" "Your face says you're not happy. Your whole demeanor says you're not happy." I thought about his question. Maybe because I learned something about myself that I'm not sure I like. Which is? That I'm capable of things I never thought I was capable of. Deception, manipulation, revenge. Maybe I'm not as different from Dennis Harper as I'd like to believe. The difference is that Dennis used his abilities to hurt innocent people for money. You used yours to stop him. Did I? Or did I use them to get back at him for stealing my wife? Cal leaned back in his chair. Does it matter? The result is the same. It matters to me. Then maybe that's your answer. The fact that it matters to you is what makes you different from Dennis Harper. I hoped he was right. A year after Dennis's arrest, I was working on a renovation project in Westport when I got a call from Agent Chen. "Thought you'd want to know," she said. "Dennis Harper was attacked in prison yesterday. Is he? He'll live, but he's in the hospital with serious injuries." "Do they know who did it?" "Prison politics. Apparently, some of his fellow inmates didn't appreciate his cooperation with authorities in other cases. Dennis had been trying to reduce his sentence by providing information about other criminal enterprises he'd been involved with. It was a dangerous game in federal prison where snitches were not well regarded. "Thought you should know," Agent Chen continued, "in case anyone contacts you about it." "Why would anyone contact me?" "Because word is that Dennis has been telling people you're responsible for his situation, that you orchestrated his downfall out of jealousy." "That's ridiculous." "I know that, and you know that, but prison inmates aren't always rational about these things." After she hung up, I sat in my truck thinking about Dennis Harper lying in a prison hospital bed, broken and defeated. I should have felt satisfaction, or at least a sense of closure. Instead, I felt empty. That evening, I told Lila about the phone call. "Do you think we're in danger?" she asked. "I don't know. Probably not. But maybe we should be careful for a while." "Is this ever going to end, Evan?" "I hope so." "Do you ever wish you'd handled things differently? Just filed for divorce and moved on?" I considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. But then I remember that Dennis wasn't just destroying our marriage. He was destroying our entire neighborhood. Someone had to stop him." "And it had to be you?" "It had to be someone. And I was the one who figured out what he was doing." Lila nodded. I'm proud of you, you know, for having the courage to fight back. Are you? Or are you just grateful that I chose to save our marriage instead of destroying it? Both. 2 years after Dennis's arrest, Lila and I renewed our wedding vows in a small ceremony attended by family and close friends. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened. That would never be possible. It was about choosing to build something new on the foundation of what remained. Mrs. Kowalski cried during the ceremony. Cal served as my best man again, just as he had at our original wedding. Maya from Flanagan's provided the catering because she'd become part of our extended family. Agent Chen sent a card wishing us well. Even she seemed to understand that our story was about more than just bringing a criminal to justice. The neighborhood had healed, mostly. Property values had recovered from the scandal. New families had moved in, bringing fresh energy and perspectives. The development that Dennis had planned was now a small park where children played and neighbors gathered for community events. Sometimes I walked through that park and thought about how different things might have been if Dennis Harper had succeeded. Hundreds of families displaced, a community destroyed, millions of dollars stolen from innocent people. I'd helped prevent that. Whatever my motives, whatever methods I'd used, the result was that justice had been served and people had been protected. That had to count for something. 3 years after Dennis's arrest, I got another call from Agent Chen. Dennis Harper died in prison yesterday, she said without preamble. I felt a strange mixture of emotions, relief, sadness, and something that might have been guilt. How? Heart attack, natural causes as far as they can tell. Was he still cooperating with investigations? Up until the end. He helped us close several other cases. After she hung up, I sat in my office thinking about Dennis Harper's life and legacy. He'd been intelligent, charismatic, and talented. Under different circumstances, he might have been a successful businessman, a community leader, a man who made positive contributions to the world. Instead, he'd chosen to be a predator, and predators, eventually, get caught. That evening, I told Lila about Dennis's passing. "How do you feel?" she asked. "I don't know. Empty, I guess. He can't hurt us anymore. He couldn't hurt us anyway. He's been in prison for 3 years. But now it's really over." I looked at my wife, the woman who'd betrayed me, helped me get justice, and worked every day since to rebuild our trust, and tried to figure out if it really was over. "Yeah," I said finally. "I think it is." Dennis Harper was buried in a small cemetery outside Hartford. No one from our neighborhood attended the funeral, but I read about it in the newspaper. His ex-wife Patricia sent flowers, which I thought showed remarkable grace. The obituary was short and to the point, noting his business career but omitting his criminal record. Even in his passing, someone was still trying to protect what was left of his reputation. I didn't feel the need to correct the record. Dennis Harper's true legacy was already written in court documents and FBI files. History would judge him accurately, even if his obituary didn't. 5 years after the whole ordeal began, Lila and I were still married, still living in the same house, still working to build something real from the wreckage of what we'd lost. It wasn't the marriage we'd had before. That innocent, trusting relationship was gone forever. But it was something else. Something harder earned and maybe more honest. We'd learned that we were both capable of betrayal and forgiveness, of deception and truth, of destruction and rebuilding. We'd learned that love wasn't just about emotion. It was about choice, commitment, and the daily decision to keep trying even when things seemed hopeless. Most importantly, we'd learned that sometimes the only way to save something is to be willing to destroy it first. Dennis Harper had tried to destroy our neighborhood, our marriage, and our lives. In the end, we'd destroyed him instead. Not through violence or illegal means, but through patience, planning, and the simple decision to fight back against someone who thought he could manipulate us with impunity. It wasn't a perfect victory. There had been casualties, trust, innocence, the comfortable illusion that we lived in a safe and predictable world. But it was justice, and sometimes justice is messy and complicated and leaves everyone involved fundamentally changed. As I sat in my backyard on a warm summer evening, watching Lila tend to the garden she'd planted where Dennis's surveillance equipment used to be hidden, I reflected on how much our lives had changed. The man who'd discovered his wife's affair 5 years ago had been naive, trusting, and unprepared for the realities of human nature. The man I was now understood that the world was full of predators like Dennis Harper, people who would take everything you had if you let them. But he also understood that ordinary people had the power to fight back, to protect what mattered to them, and to make sure that actions had consequences. It was a harder wisdom than I'd possessed before, but it was wisdom nonetheless. And as Lila looked up from her flowers and smiled at me, a smile that held acknowledgement of everything we'd lost and everything we'd fought to keep, I knew that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones most worth fighting. Dennis Harper had taught us that someone you know can become your worst enemy. But he'd also taught us that sometimes your worst enemy can become the catalyst for discovering who you really are and what you're really capable of. In the end, that might have been the most valuable lesson of all.